News of Camilla ordering the demolition of Princess Diana's memorial garden at Kensington exploded like a media bomb. Within hours, social media was flooded with angry posts. Not everyone had set foot there, but nearly the whole of Britain knew that garden was a sacred part of the national memory. Camilla explained that she wanted to modernize and redesign the space to fit the image of a new monarchy, but to the public. Those words felt like a slap in the face to millions of people's memories. The press called it a blatant insult to Diana's legacy. TV programs dissected the burning question: why Diana's garden? Those who had visited shared memories of the place where they had cried, laughed, and told their children about the people's princess. And now, all of it stood on the brink of being erased not by time, but by a single cold decision. To understand why the outrage burned so fiercely, you have to go back to the beginnings, to the days when the garden was first created. Back then, Diana's garden at Kensington felt like an open-air sanctuary, where flowers, fragrance, and light blended into a silent hymn for the memory of a woman who had touched millions of hearts. Beneath the canopy of white roses, her favorite thousands of Britons, young and old, and even visitors from across the ocean, would quietly lay bouquets, letters, or small gifts in tribute. On the anniversary of her death, the garden bloomed more brilliantly than ever, not from the gardener's hands, but from the love of countless hearts drawn to one place. Many members of the royal family had slipped quietly into that garden, away from the cameras, to sit on the stone bench by the pond, as if hoping for one more conversation with Diana. William and Harry, as boys, had once raced around the white daisies, laughing as they told their mother their silly little stories. After she was gone, they came back seeking a fragment of her warmth, in a palace often colder than its marble walls. But the garden was never just a physical space. It was a living symbol of kindness, warmth, and the people's princess spirit Diana left behind. Every rose bush, every pine, every wooden bench where she once sat reading carried the mark of a love without borders, a love for the sick, the poor, and those society had forgotten. That is why, when Camilla signed the order to tear it down in the name of modernization, she struck at something sacred. Many believe this was more than landscaping. It was an attempt to erase Diana's presence from every corner of the palace. Even within the royal family, the decision ignited tension. William was said to have strongly objected. Harry, thousands of miles away, publicly condemned it, calling it an erasure of our mother's memory. In today's video, we'll explore in detail why this garden became such a powerful symbol of Diana's love and compassion, what Camilla's true aims might be in modernizing such a cherished place, and how the public and the royal family have responded. Stay tuned as we unravel the full story gripping Britain and beyond. Camilla's decision was made during a closed-door meeting at the palace, attended by a handful of close advisors and senior officials in charge of royal estates. According to leaked sources, she did not mince words, directly instructing them to clear out the entire memorial garden at Kensington and replace it with a new design more in keeping with the times. The official reason given was to cut maintenance costs and create a multi-purpose space for royal events. But for many, that sounded like nothing more than a thin veil over deeper motives. Some began to ask, could this be a quiet act of jealousy toward Diana's enduring legacy, a woman still adored by the public more than any royal of Camilla's generation? Even as queen consort, Camilla has never escaped Diana's towering shadow. Every time her name appears in the media, comparisons to Charles's first wife inevitably follow. Perhaps demolishing the garden was a way to erase the physical reminders of that symbol, to assert her own place and authority within the palace. Another theory suggests this was part of Camilla's push to reshape the monarchy's image for the modern age, replacing personal, emotional landmarks with spaces that serve functional and ceremonial purposes. But if that was her intention, it revealed a striking lack of sensitivity because she touched the most fragile nerve in the public's heart. Of course, there is also the possibility that this was simply a poorly thought-out decision, made without anticipating the fallout. In the royal world, where every move is examined under a microscope, Even something as seemingly minor as redesigning a garden can erupt into a full-blown media crisis, especially when that garden holds the memories of millions. The public's reaction hit like a tidal wave. Within hours of the leak, social media exploded with outrage. The hashtag #SaveDiana's Garden shot straight to the top of the trending list in the UK and quickly spread to the US, Australia, and several European countries. Countless photos of the garden in full bloom, its white roses gleaming in the summer sun, were shared alongside heartfelt captions. "This is not just a garden. This is Diana's heart, and touch the garden. And you touch the memory of an entire nation." Journalists, commentators, and those who had once met Diana publicly condemned the move. Many recalled their own encounters with her in that very garden, moments where she listened, spoke with warmth, and made them feel seen. These personal accounts flooded the media, fueling an already powerful wave of public emotion. Inside the palace, royal advisors immediately recognized the signs of a looming PR crisis. They feared that the monarchy's image, already weathered by years of turbulence, could suffer further damage without a careful response. Some urged Camilla to pause the plans, or at the very least announce them with greater transparency, explaining the rationale and consulting the public. Yet, sources inside the palace revealed that Camilla held her ground, insisting that emotions must not dictate the decisions necessary for the future of the palace. That uncompromising stance turned what could have been a minor dispute into an open confrontation between her and the deep affection the public still holds for Diana. Whatever Camilla's original motive, jealousy, a bid for authority, or simply a desire to modernize the impact, had far outstripped her expectations. People began questioning her true role in the monarchy. Was she a partner to the king in preserving and honoring tradition, or a figure willing to challenge and overwrite values embedded in the nation's soul? For Diana's admirers, the answer seemed obvious. This was an insult. For the neutral observer, it became a test of whether Camilla possessed the sensitivity and respect for history required of her position. And for outsiders merely watching the saga unfold, it was proof that in the royal world, a decision that might seem to concern nothing more than a few rose bushes and a walking path could shake the very foundations of public trust. In the end, this went far beyond a garden. It became a story about power, memory, and the battle for space in the hearts of the people. Camilla, whether she liked it or not, had stepped directly into the center of the storm, and the way she handled the next steps would determine whether her image could be salvaged, or whether she would forever be tied to the erasure of a piece of Diana's legacy. The sky hung low and gray over Kensington, a cold wind threading its way through the pathways. Charles walked slowly, no words spoken, the only sound the heavy rhythm of his shoes on the damp stone. Before him, the once vibrant sea of white roses was now barren earth. Piles of broken branches lay stacked in a corner. A few shovels were still planted in the soil like wounds left open. He stopped. His eyes reddened, shimmered in the dim light. His shoulders trembled almost imperceptibly. A single tear slipped down his cheek, silent, but weighted with grief. "She didn't deserve this," he whispered, the words barely carried by the wind, yet heavy enough for those near him to feel their force. In an instant, the sorrow in his gaze hardened into something sharper. Charles clenched his fists until the knuckles whitened. Without another glance, he turned and strode back toward the palace, his pace quickening as though to contain the storm building inside him. Memories of Diana surged unbidden, her in a simple white dress, bending to tend a rosebush, her gentle smile as she spoke with visitors, her warm voice explaining how the garden was a place for people to feel close, comforted, and loved. Each recollection cut deeper, sharpening his guilt. Charles knew he could never turn back time to make amends for what was lost between them, but at least the garden had been a small way to keep her gentleness alive. Now it was gone, not by accident, not by nature, but by deliberate order. And worst of all, that order had come from his current wife. He demanded to see Camilla immediately. When she entered, her face composed, almost detached. He no longer upheld the royal family's unwritten rule of restraint. The tension between grief and fury was about to break, and why? Charles asked, his voice low and heavy. Camilla raised an eyebrow. The garden needed to be modernized. It's outdated, expensive to maintain. I was only thinking about the long-term benefits. Long-term benefits. He enunciated each word, his eyes flashing with anger. This is not just a garden. This is Diana's memory. It's where people come to remember her. You know that. Camilla folded her arms and sighed. Charles, you have to understand, we're in the 21st century. The monarchy needs to change. You can't keep everything frozen in place just because of feelings. That phrase, just because of feelings, hit like a hammer blow. Charles stepped closer, his voice sharp. Those feelings are the only thing left that binds this monarchy to the hearts of the people. Destroy it, and you cut that cord. The air in the room grew dense. It had been a long time since Charles had spoken to Camilla like this. His eyes carried disappointment, fury, and a deep, private pain. Camilla stayed silent for a moment, then replied slowly, You think I did this to hurt her memory? I just wanted to assert my place. Charles stepped back, letting out a short, humorless laugh. By erasing the mark of a woman who's gone, by turning the whole world against us. She didn't answer. Her silence felt like an admission. Charles turned away, his hand trembling as it closed around the doorknob. He knew any action now would be scrutinized by the press. But in that moment, he wasn't thinking like a king. He was thinking like a man watching the memory of his late wife being erased. Outside, social media was in full revolt. The hashtag #SaveDiana's flooded Twitter and Instagram. Before and after photos of the garden's destruction spread like wildfire. Criticism of Camilla came not only from the public, but also from newspaper editorials, some from outlets usually friendly to the royals. Palace communications staff feared the backlash could deal a heavy blow to the monarchy's already fragile image under Charles's reign. But for Charles, public opinion was secondary. What haunted him most was the image of the uprooted white roses, the bare stone paths, and the gnawing sense of failure that he couldn't protect a piece of Diana's legacy, something he had wanted, however belatedly, to preserve as a silent act of atonement. The argument with Camilla was not about aesthetics or budget. It was a clash of worldviews on one side, the determination to preserve memory and emotion. On the other, the ambition to reshape the monarchy's image with a more pragmatic hand. And in the collision between those visions, Charles stood in the middle, both king and man, torn by wounds that had never fully healed. That moment in the garden, the tear falling before his anger erupted at Camilla, revealed something the public rarely saw. Charles was not always measured, calculated. He could explode when something he treasured was harmed. And this time, it wasn't just a few plants, it was the memory of a woman who had defined the royal family in the hearts of millions. From that confrontation onward, the story of Kensington Garden was no longer confined to palace walls. The news leaked, spreading like wildfire. Within hours, not just the British public, but people thousands of miles away knew. And soon, the news reached Diana's two sons, William and Harry, in two different corners of the world. In London, William was at a charity event when an aide whispered a few words in his ear. His expression froze. The microphone in his hand tightened in his grip. He thanked the guests and excused himself from the stage earlier than planned. Back in his private office, he stared at the latest photos, the once flourishing paths now bare. The stone bench where he and Harry had posed with their mother now gone without a trace. A heavy breath escaped him, anger rising in his chest, but, as always, he swallowed it, keeping his face calm. William knew that as Prince of Wales, every word he spoke would be dissected. But this time, silence was not an option. Within hours, a statement from Kensington Palace was released. The Duke of Cambridge believes the garden is an irreplaceable part of Princess Diana's legacy. He publicly calls for the full restoration of the garden to its original state and is committed to protecting his mother's memory. The words were calm yet resolute, less a polite request than a vow to defend her legacy at any cost. Meanwhile, nearly 9,000 kilometers away in California, Harry got the news while at home with Meghan and their children. His phone lit up with a message from a close friend in Britain. "They've destroyed the garden. Camilla's behind it." Harry froze. In an instant, he was a boy again, his mother's hand in his, walking him past the rose beds, telling him the names of each bloom and the meaning of each daisy. He remembered summer afternoons on the grass. The whole family gathered as Diana laughed under the setting sun. Now that place was just an empty, cold patch of earth. Harry did not choose silence. He posted a message on social media, along with an old photo of Diana in the garden. "This is not just flowers and stone. This is my mother's heart." Tearing it down as an insult. "I call on everyone to continue to remember and honor her, not just in words, but in action." The post spread rapidly, garnering hundreds of thousands of shares, turning the dispute from a royal news item into a global wave. The British and American media immediately compared the two reactions, one restrained and diplomatic, the other blunt and emotional. But beneath it all, both William and Harry were united in one aim to protect the memory of their late mother. And then, something rare happened. Amid busy schedules and the geographic distance, William and Harry agreed to have a private video call. The image of the two brothers appeared on screen, the initial silence lasting longer than a greeting. William was the first to speak. "I just looked at those photos again. Do you remember that stone bench was where Mom told us stories about her humanitarian trips?" Harry nodded slightly, his eyes softening. "I remember. And I also remember Mom once said this garden was the only place in the palace where she felt at home." Silence stretched again. No one mentioned past arguments or harsh words. In that moment when there were only two sons sharing the same loss. "I'll do everything I can to restore it," William said firmly. "So will I, even from afar." "I'll speak up," Harry replied, determination in his eyes. It might not have been a reconciliation, but it was a fragile bridge, a bridge they thought had long been lost. The destruction of the garden, paradoxically, had led them toward a shared goal, protecting a symbol neither of them wanted to see vanish. In royal history, moments like this are rare and precious. It not only revealed the deep love the two brothers still have for their mother, but also showed that Diana's legacy still holds the power to unite, even when the family is divided by distance and prejudice. And for that reason, the fight to protect Kensington Garden was never just about flowers and stone, about a physical space. It was a fight for memory, for compassion, and for a part of the heart that William and Harry knew they would carry for the rest of their lives. The moment William and Harry stood together, even if only through a brief video call, became a ray of hope in the clouded skies of the monarchy. But out there, the real storm was forming, and this time, it would not only engulf those inside the palace, but spread across the world. In less than 24 hours after the story of Kensington Gardens' destruction broke, international media blasted headlines like hammers against Camilla's image. "Camilla destroys Diana's legacy." "King Charles breaks down at the sight of Diana's garden in ruins." "Princess's legacy in ruthless hands." Before and after images of the garden were placed side by side, creating a brutal contrast, one side bursting with flowers cradling memories, the other a cold emptiness as if love had never taken root there. On social media, the hashtag Diana's garden exploded, quickly climbing to the top trends in the UK, the US, Australia, and even distant countries like Japan and Brazil. People not only expressed outrage at Camilla's decision, but also deep sympathy for Charles, a king long known for his restraint, now seen breaking down in public. One user wrote, "This is not just a garden. This is a piece of Diana's heart. Camilla has torn it away." Support for William and Harry surged to levels unseen since Diana's funeral. The public saw in them two sons, distant yet united in the same ideal, preserving their mother's memory. Posts from William and Harry were shared millions of times, accompanied by petitions demanding the restoration of the garden. Some charities even proposed fundraising to rebuild the space as a communal gesture of love for the princess. Remarkably, this wave sparked a phenomenon not seen in decades, a fierce resurgence of public affection for Diana. Old video clips of her hugging children, speaking with the homeless, or simply smiling radiantly among flowers began circulating again. On TikTok, hundreds of thousands of videos were made, pairing clips of Diana walking in the wind with emotional music, drawing tens of millions of views. Black and white photographs of Diana in elegant gowns, bending down to hold the hand of an AIDS patient in the early days of the epidemic when the stigma was still crushing, once again resurfaced as proof of her courage and compassion. Her famous words, "Being a queen in people's hearts is more important than being on the throne," were printed on t-shirts, plastered on posters, and shared widely online as a subtle act of defiance against Camilla's move. Media analysts called it a severe image crisis for the queen consort. Several newspapers bluntly stated she had undone decades of careful work to rehabilitate her public image. This incident didn't just reopen old wounds, the infamous love triangle between Charles, Diana, and Camilla. It reignited the collective memory of millions about the people's princess and the grief of her loss in 1997. The contrast between Diana, a warm, accessible, deeply loved woman, and Camilla, now branded by some as the destroyer of a legacy, had never been starker. Experts warned the royal brand itself could suffer lasting damage. Because in this story, Camilla had not just dismantled a garden, she had touched a national symbol, a piece of memory the British people consider irreplaceable. Small protests began outside the gates of Kensington Palace. Placards read, "Give Diana her garden back," and "No one can erase memory." Bouquets started appearing along the railings, a poignant echo of the sea of flowers that once carpeted the palace gates after Diana's death. Ironically, this saga transformed the Memorial Garden from a quiet sanctuary into the epicenter of a public movement, where visitors once came to reflect in silence. Thousands now arrived to make a statement that love for Diana and the memories she inspired could not be swept away by a bureaucratic decision. And through all these voices, one message rang clearest: an unshakable unity in protecting Diana's legacy. It's a legacy not preserved in dusty archives, but alive in the hearts of millions. Even with William and Harry still estranged, and Charles grappling with divisions inside the family, the public had found a common ground. Diana remains, and will always remain, the people's princess, untouched by time or by attempts to erase her from history. Inside the palace's thick stone walls, the air was heavy enough to cut. The destruction of Diana's memorial garden had sparked not only a firestorm outside, but a tense, silent battlefield within the royal household itself. Advisors split into two distinct camps. The younger, media-savvy faction urged transparency and a public apology, seeing it as the only way to calm outrage and salvage trust. To them, the era of cold-pressed statements and distant formality was over. Authenticity was now the crown's most potent defense. On the other side, seasoned courtiers steeped in tradition viewed silence as the last shield. They argued the public would move on if the monarchy didn't pour fuel on the fire by admitting fault. In their eyes, apologies were weakness, and any admission would be exploited to exhaustion. Caught at the center of the storm, Camilla found herself under relentless scrutiny. Photographs of her smiling at a recent engagement were splashed online with sarcastic captions, smiling while dismantling the legacy of the dead. Some critics insisted this was no simple garden refurbishment, but a deliberate attempt to erase the mark of a woman who still lived in the public's heart. Yet there were defenders' voices claiming she had been misunderstood, that the decision was driven by financial pressures and a push to modernize public spaces, not personal animosity. But these defenses were drowned out by the tidal wave of condemnation sweeping through social media and the global press. Meanwhile, Charles stood at a perilous crossroads. As king, he had to consider the stability and unity of the monarchy. As a husband, he was bound to protect his wife from brutal attacks. But as a man who had once loved and lost, he knew Diana was more than a memory. She was a part of the nation's soul. The choice was almost impossible. To defend Camilla meant confronting the deep, enduring affection the public held for Diana. To openly champion Diana's legacy risked fracturing his marriage in the early days of his reign. Some royal watchers suggested this decision could define Charles's entire legacy. A move toward reconciliation, restoring the garden, and acknowledging its significance might strengthen public trust and goodwill. But staying silent, letting the controversy fade, could brand him as a king indifferent to the memory of the people's princess, something history might never forgive. Perhaps most revealing was the way this crisis stripped bare a reality. The British monarchy is no longer untouchable in the age of transparency and instantaneous media. Where once controversial decisions could be buried behind palace doors, now they can ignite a global debate in mere hours. And in that debate, the image of Diana with her compassion, warmth, and humanity once again stands as the benchmark against which her successors are judged. The division within the palace was more than a dispute over media strategy. It was a clash between two worlds: the old guard, who believed in controlling information and wielding the power of silence, and the new order, where every action is dissected and broadcast instantly. At the center of this conflict, Charles was forced to make a choice not just for the present, but for how history would remember him. In the end, the destruction of Diana's memorial garden was never just about flowers and stone. It was about memory, about a nation's emotions, and about the power or fragility of symbols. It proved that in the 21st century, a throne is sustained not only by power and ceremony, but by the ability to understand and honor the invisible values that live in the public's heart. And as the palace gates closed, photographs of Diana's once vibrant garden continued to spread across phone screens around the world, a lasting reminder that some legacies cannot be erased by a single decision, no matter if it is signed in the most powerful rooms in Britain.